I know the city manager is here, and we have a number of other people watching on Zoom, and I presume on the broadcast. So yesterday we worked our way through a major chunk of the budget for fiscal year 23-24. And before we plunge into the remainder, I want to ask, is there anything we need to circle back on? Anything that, popped up overnight in your minds that you think I didn't understand or want to address that or want to just say something, clarify something further? Any of you have anything you want to add or address?
I just would like to have a breakdown of the $450,000 of the City Hall budget for the professional services. I wonder if I can find it somewhere.
That is for the architectural contract, which we're estimating to be somewhere in the $340,000 range. And then we've set aside, and that might not be right. It might be a little less than that, but approximately $300,000 for the architect and approximately $100,000 for the owner's representative. And those contracts will be negotiated once and whether City Council approves phase 2.
So the 100K is for what? Ownership? Something?
Owner's representative. They're the city's project manager.
Owner percentage?
Owner's representative.
It came in and out. I really didn't get that. Owner
representative.
Okay, representative. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
All right.
No problem.
So around like 400K around the neighborhood. The 50K is miscellaneous, something like that, right?
Yeah, we'll and those will be negotiated, and then City Council, if they approve phase 2, will ultimately review and approve that before it's signed.
Okay. So for the architect, what's the firm's name again?
Bearing Architecture.
Bearing.
So as BEARING Architecture.
So are they specialized in commercial building?
No, but they went through a competitive RFP process last year, and were selected by council ultimately.
Yeah, the 300K, does it include the engineering report or all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's approximately to be held to that exact figure, but
yeah, because we are in the middle of building a house, and this amount is a lot more than we pay for what we, the architecture and engineering. But I'm not comparing it. I'm just curious about it. So
I'm glad they paid less.
I was about to say, how big of a house you're going to build? Good grief. Okay. Any other questions, concerns, comments, complaints, clarifications needed? Okay. Let's resume. Layla, you're on.
I'm going to share my screen briefly, but then I'm actually going to hand it over to the building official, our development services manager, actually, and just want to reorient people with the schedule. Okay. Do you see my screen? So just the budget presentation?
Yep.
Okay, great. So today, May 9th, we're going to start with the building fund and the building reserve fund. So Scott Gebhardt, the city's development services manager, is also the city's building official. Scott does all the residential building inspections in the city of Manzanita. And then we're going to hand it over to Dan Weitzel, Public Works Director. He will be going through the water utility fund. For those that have been on the budget committee, this was previously called the Water Operations Fund, but I feel that utility fund is actually a more appropriate name for it. So that's what we're calling it. And then he will go through the Public Works Equipment Reserve Fund, the Water SDC Fund, formerly the Water Construction Fund, the Storm Drain SDC Fund, the Park SDC Fund, the road fund, and then I'll finish it up with the timber management fund and the housing loan rehab fund. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to ask Scott Gebhardt to jump on, and I think we're going to need to allow him to share his screen.
I should be able to.
You should be in the system.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Find the correct. Okay, can everybody see that? Is that?
Yeah, but if you could move it to your full presentation so we're not seeing the sidebar, that'd be nice.
I clicked, but for some reason not coming on. There we go. Can you see the full thing now?
No, we see your presentation. The one that has the two at the same time.
I don't know if I can do that.
All the multiple screens we have.
I know, I got to turn off one of them, I think.
Hey, Scott, if you notice in the box there, it says at the top of your screen, play narratives. I believe if you turn that off, that'll fix that issue.
On which, well, I just put it on one screen, so give me a minute. How's that?
Yay.
Okay, that worked better. But two screens always messes it up. So I'm going to go through the building budget, which resides in the Development Services Department. And our department consists of myself. I've been here about 7 years, just over 7. Judy Wilson, she manages the short-term rental program, and she's been here 13 years. And then we have Chris Bird, who has now been here just over a year. And I just want to give a shout out to Chris. He actually passed the permit tech certification. And my understanding, that's a pretty hard test. Encompasses quite a few different areas. So last year, 22-23 budget, we did see a pretty good decrease in the amount of new construction starts for the year. We're still tracking ahead of our average prior to COVID. And I expect those numbers probably to stay in the 15 to 18 new home starts a year for the next several years. There was a slowdown with due to the interest rates going up. I noticed after talking to some of the local builders that some people put houses on hold for a few months, and now I'm starting to see them trickle in. So I don't foresee our numbers going below 200 anytime soon. For revenue, 200,000. So last year, with the help of the general fund and water fund, we were able to purchase a large-scale scanner and plotter, and the purpose of that are twofold. The main purpose is to be able to scan and digitize so we can archive all the files we have over in the police station right now. It's a slow, tedious process. It is going to take several years at the rate we're able to do it. And then with the printing ability, the large plotter, I'm able to print out large-scale full sets of plans and laminate them for contractors. I've also began updating the tree ordinance, and that will continue into next fiscal year, and hopefully be able to bring that to council sometime late this year. And then Judy, her biggest accomplishment this year was actually she was able to implement the audit, which is something that was implemented during the update to the short-term rental ordinance. So she completed her first audit, and really everybody seems to be in compliance. There was a couple that were not reporting full dollar amounts. And so we've identified a few areas that we'll be able to look at again this next fiscal year. So for 23-24 fiscal year, we're going to continue digitizing and archiving the building and planning files, but we're also going to be working on the property files and short-term rental files. Judy's got, I think, 4 or 5 file cabinets of stuff that will hopefully be able to get archived. then like I said, my goal is to bring the new tree ordinance to the council later this year, probably towards the end of the year. And then begin working on a master fee schedule so that we can work on cost recovery. It kind of goes in line with the recent increase in short-term rental fees, where we looked at how much staff time is involved in different areas of things we do. And really, we're trying to get as close to 100% cost recovery for these services. Every year after we're done with the renewals in August for short-term rental renewal licenses, we review the process we had in place, and we try to make changes that benefit the people that are renewing and staff to streamline that process. And we'll start that again in probably September, and then also another round of audits for next year. So this year for 22-23, we're actually tracking below 300 with the proposed revenue and building, and I explained that a little bit earlier. That's kind of due to people taking a step back on starting new homes. I believe, based on what I'm seeing, talking to contractors, we'll still be around 225 in revenue. And you add that to the carryover balance, as you can see from 2021 and 21-22. Especially 21-22, the numbers were double, if not more, than what normally we probably should have been bringing in. But due to COVID, everybody wanted to live out here and move out here, and it shows in permitting. So the resources will be about $579,000 to start with. And expenditures. Now, you'll notice there are a few changes in here. Stationery has gone up. And some of that's due to the fact that I do print out a full set of plans and laminate. And it's not cheap to do, but I think, with the permit fees, it more than covers that. Contract services, I've asked for a little bit more. That covers any commercial plan reviews, inspections, any vacation time if I ever plan some. And yes, Leila, I will. It covers that. And I've also budgeted a little bit more in there to cover inspections and consulting during the design of City Hall. And then professional services, that is for things like IT. We do have some fees, annual fees that we pay some years and other years we don't, for data conversion for e-permitting. So I kept that number just a little bit higher because I believe we have to renew one of those this year. The assessment on building permits, I did lower that. That number fluctuates based on revenue on building permits. So it's a 12% fee collected on all permits that directly passes through. We basically collect those money, and every quarter it goes to the state. I believe this year we only ended up spending about $22,000 out of the projected 45. So I like to have that buffer in there. So at the end of the year, if we have a run on a lot of new housing starts, I don't have to try to figure out how I'm going to pay the difference. Then down under dues and subscriptions, that is our U.S. bank fees that anybody that pays through credit card, we have to pay. They're pretty good fees on larger amounts. So between that and code books and different memberships for the department, like the OBOA, I've increased that just a little bit. The rest of the budget stays pretty in line with what it was before. We did add insurance, and that's for vehicles. So we currently have 2 vehicles in the department. The one I use for inspections, and also Chris is using one for doing the short-term rental inspections. So the slide I did not add in here was the reserve, but the reserve is money I'm transferring out for a vehicle. Last year we transferred out $12,500. I didn't spend the full amount. I spent $7,000 and bought one of the rigs from Public Works. So because they were looking to buy a bigger truck to be able to pull all their equipment. So after the transfer in, we'll still have a reserve balance of $7,000 in there for future vehicle purchases. So I believe that's my last slide, and I will stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, I can try to answer them.
Hey, Scott, did you say that the building fee is 12% of the cost of the project?
The building fee is 12% of the permit fee, not the plan review fee, just the permit fee itself.
So what does it cost for somebody to build a house here as far as fees? Can you give me a range?
The average up in the Highlands is around 8,000, but that includes your plumbing, mechanical, structural, plan review fee. So out of that, you're looking at probably around 3,800 to 4,500 in building permit fee.
And does that vary between residential and commercial?
It's all based on valuation. So the valuation of the project, the material, labor to do the project.
Okay. Are those fees typical for towns our size around here?
A few years ago, back in 2020, when we implemented e-permitting, prior to that, I went through a fee increase and got it approved. And then as soon as e-permitting went in place, we were able to start charging the new fees. The fees we collected, we ran in the black for as far back as I could see. So the general fund was supplementing the building budget by a considerable amount, anywhere from 30 to 70,000 a year.
Gotcha.
So
We ran a deficit
what's that?
we ran a deficit up until 2 years ago. We were
Yeah. So, but with COVID, it was just a perfect storm. Had we stayed on track with our normal 10 to 12 new houses a year, we wouldn't have the surplus in building. But that money is reserved for when we do slow down, that money is used to continue running the department.
Great. Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions or?
No, thank you, Scott.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I was slow and
Okay.
I would like. I have heard you say multiple times, Scott, using the word protected. A certain amount of your budget is protected. Would you mind explaining what you mean by that?
So the fund can only be utilized to enforce the building codes for inspections, plan reviews. You can't take $100,000 out of the building fund and use it on another city project. It has to be specifically used in building. Now, the indirect transfer out that we do every year is an indirect cost that can be put into the general fund. But for the most part, those funds, you can't take a lump sum out of that unless it's directly used to support the building department, inspections, plan reviews.
Yeah. And
So
that
the term it's not a state term, it's your term.
No, it is a state ORS.
it's projected by ORS 455-210. So that governs how, so the money that comes in through the building permit revenue is restricted. And the city's past practice before I got here was to let that commingle with the general fund because, as Scott mentioned, it was running in the red. It was running in deficit. So the general fund was effectively subsidizing the program. When I got here, I created a special fund last year. So now that money will be audited and is kept separate. So if you, for example, look at page 17 of the budget where the FTE allocations are, those are based on, so for example, he mentioned Chris and Judy are in his department, but Judy's paid 100% out of the general fund. Half of Chris's job is paid out of the general fund for the planning activities that he does, but the other half, which is the permit tech, which is specific to the building fund, is paid out of the building fund. And 70%, it was 80% last year, but 70% of Scott's salary is paid out of the building fund. So we keep that money separate now that there is a surplus. And as the intent of that is, the intent of the state law is to ensure that during lean years, when we don't have a lot of building going on, the building department is protected in a sense that there's those funds are only to be used for building related purposes. Does that help?
Thank you. So in a sense, you're using restricted and protected to some extent interchangeably. Am I correct in that those funds are restricted? The use of the funds is restricted. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so for like the short-term rental inspection Scott does, that's paid out of the general fund. That's why 30% of his salary is paid out of the general fund.
Right.
So if Julie's job is only the short-term rental, duty, so why doesn't the building fund pay for her salary? Why does it come from the general fund? Isn't it 100%?
It's 100% out of the general fund because the short-term rental program is not part of the city's building department fund. So the building department, as Scott said, it's for inspections, it's for plan review, and things specific to the issuance and enforcement, the issuance of building permits and the enforcement of building codes. So Judy, the reason why they're housed together, why I made that decision for them to work together, is because of Scott's expertise in the residential building code. He does the short-term rental inspections. And so it's a good synergy for the two of them to be, since we're split up into 3 places, to be in the same place because they have to coordinate a lot around those inspections. But Judy's job has nothing to do with the building department. She's strictly short-term rentals, which is funded by the general fund.
And that question is, I thought I saw Scott's presentation slide saying that in this coming year, anticipate 10 to 12 new build in the city. And then you also mentioned about $38,000 on average of each permit. So shouldn't it be like $380,000, anticipating for the building permit?
No,
And we have 225,000 here.
it's 225,000. I'm not sure where you're coming up with the 300. I didn't hear the number.
Well, the slide on your slide is the anticipate 10 to 12 new build.
That's the average is 10 to 12. We'll probably be around 15 or 18.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That, and then unless I hear it wrong, that when you answer Brad's question, is that the new build each permit costs like 38,000. Did you say that, or did I get it wrong?
Around 8,000.
8,000 is the permit.
Roughly. I mean, that's a ballpark. You have some that cost 25 or 30,000, but on a general new build home is around $8,000 for, say, one of the houses up in the Highlands. There's also other permits that go along with structural. That's the structural permit portion. There's mechanical and plumbing and remodel permits. So there's a lot more than just the 15 to 18 houses. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. I just suspect myself heard it wrong. I did.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have any other questions for Scott? Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Dan, but I'm gonna run the show because Dan's off site and we want to make sure that we don't have any technical difficulties. Bear with me. All right, you see the budget meeting presentation?
Yeah.
Second. Great.
All right.
Dan, the show is yours.
Show's mine. Hello, everybody. Hopefully today you are getting to enjoy a little bit of the beautiful weather. So I'm going to be going over many line items, so I'll be going somewhat quick through the budget. So stop me if you have any questions, but I'll be stopping essentially in between each one of the sections. So kind of a recap of our 22-23 season. Dorcas project, as most of you are aware, is in full swing. It is due to be completed by early June. So that will be a much needed area of improvement, replacing a lot of asbestos main out. So roughly about 2,200 feet of asbestos concrete will be disappearing. So the other thing is water meters. This has been an ongoing project. We got our first AMI unit installed up on the reservoirs this year, and we're going to be doing the conversion over in the 23-24. And essentially what that means is we are moving forward to one of the goals that was set to me a while back of getting our meter system where it's fully automated. So if one of you guys call up and say, hey, Dan, it seems like I'm using a lot of water. Well, actually, you would talk to Lori, since she's our billing clerk, but she'd be able to tell you, oh, in the last 24 hours, you used X amount of water. It also will help us track things, water leaks and reverse flows, things like that. So another big step moving forward to that. So we're hoping, like I said, in this next coming budget year, we will be almost all the way through the system and getting it all automated. So one of the things I do want to point out this year too, we had wildfires in November, we had windstorms in December, and we had quite a bit of snow this year. And so, as I said, it's much nice to see that sun come back out. But I wanted to touch base on this is because this affects my budget. And so not just expenditures, but also on planning, because we try to plan for the worst, hope for the best. So it does cause a pretty good rollover of funds when especially you look at the road fund and the water fund, especially because we have to plan for the O&Os. So as we're moving through, you'll see in the water budget a pretty good size rollover. Let Layla hit that next slide. So a couple of other things this last year as we recap. So in 2022-23, I bought a 2011 Ford F-150 from the Oregon State Surplus. It's the vehicle I use for essentially everything I do, including a little bit of emergency management and such. We replaced out one of our Chevy pickups, the one that Jason, my water utility guy, uses. And so he now has a 3/4 ton truck. So now our whole fleet is made up of, essentially, except for mine, but the rest of the trucks are all 3/4 ton, 1-tons. So that means now we can haul all of our trailers that we have at Public Works. And I would like to point out the price tags that we pay for this equipment. The F-150, it is a 2011. It was in immaculate shape. It cost us $11,000. The Chevy pickup was $6,200. So the other thing we did purchase from Oregon State Surplus was also a really nice cargo trailer, which now holds our water purification system versus a Connex box. We saved the Connex box, so we'll be using it for other things, but it made our water system more portable now. And so another big thing for us is we didn't pay for it, but we picked up a large generator through Oregon Spire grant. That generator is large enough to run our water treatment facility, our well site, the fire station. If the council approves of it, the city hall, if for some reason that generator went down, this generator was designed to essentially be able to snap onto most big buildings and feed up power to their backup generators. Okay. So it was about $100,000 gift. I'll take it. So, yeah. So this budget year, though, we also sold, I missed the number there, but it was $7,000 to the building department. They took our previous half-ton Chevy, which works perfect for Scott. And then, I don't know if you folks remember, we had that one of those, what was left of a kind of a beat-up little Ford Ranger. And so we sent that down to Oregon State Surplus, and we got $9,102 for that thing.
Wow. Literally
about fell in my chair laughing, but hey, I'll take it. All right, there we go. So I'm going to jump into the utilities funds. We're going to start with water fund. I want to point out again that carryover balance, you'll notice it says $338,000, and this is because, once again, I budget as conservatively as I can, but I have to also put in reserve funds into my budget lines in case something happens. And so what it does is I don't spend it. So I don't work off that concept, you spend it or you don't get it again. No, we try not to spend it if we don't have to. So with a pretty good size amount of money, we did earn some good interest rate, $7,000. I would point out also on the 22-23 budget, you will see that we called for $1 million. For water sales, we are at 1.1 million right now. And so we'll get just shy of probably 1.2, but I just want to point it out once again. I try to be as conservative as I can, but be realistic with the numbers.
Mhm.
And that,
And if I can just jump in real quick, that that's what the end of year analysis was done on. So we just got those numbers that we're at 1.1 million. So we actually have 100,000 more than what is seen here. So I just want folks to be aware of that. Thanks.
all right. So yeah, so like again said, I'm conservative. I learned that from Jerry on through. Layla is very good about, making sure I'm conservative on things and watching my spending. So she has been a good role model for that. So next slide.
So Dan, before you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
It seems to me in a conversation we had recently, you were talking about meter installation and it was going pretty slow.
Yes. That will affect the SDC, so the capital, when we get to the capital funds.
Oh, okay.
It does not affect the water sales. Water sales
Okay.
have gradually go up, especially when new houses, more water being sold.
Okay.
I have a question also on the revenue side. So your sales areas include 3 wholesale customers, UGB area, and city limits. Is it possible to break that down? I'll go with your judgment about whether it's worth it, but I'm curious to know what we're charging, what the revenue is from the 3 wholesale customers.
I can in the future, I can do that. I can run a report. Just be aware that the wholesale customer water funds don't go strictly into our coffers. It gets more complicated because of our our intergovernment agreement with Wheeler. So it helps pay for, essentially, those get divided between Wheeler and us. And that's for Route 53 water and Tideland. So State
What
Park.
about the park? Yeah, go ahead.
State Park's 100% ours.
So I don't understand, since aren't Route 53 and Tideland beyond the interconnection with Wheeler? Why would Wheeler share in that revenue?
Because Wheeler also is part owner of the well site. That's part of the
I see what you mean.
Yep. And
So you're selling the state out of your share of the water.
Of our water, because that water comes into our reservoirs and then through our distribution system and to the state park. The water for Tideland and for Route 53 water comes from the transmission line strictly from the well site.
Well, I'll defer to you and Layla, but I just think it would be useful to understand the different customers. For example, I know you charge a different rate for the UGB customers. And so we just seeing Manzanita sales, UGB sales, and wholesale sales would simply, unless it's too hard to do, would be useful information if we're for the budget committee.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely look at breaking that out. I'll talk more with Layla on it.
I think that would be interesting to see as well. I think Jenna has a question.
Yeah, if we're done. I am wondering, so these reflect the current water rates.
Yes.
And so we're talking about new water rates tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
And I expect that they will be increased by something. How soon will those new water rates go into place? Will they get approved? We'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll approve them in June, maybe? And then when would they go into effect?
If they go that way, correct me if I'm wrong, Layla, but they would be going in effect July 1.
Okay.
But
so
we did not budget those numbers. So that 1.1 that you see in funds made does not count any of the things as far as the new meter costs. as far or the water rate study stuff.
Will that require a supplemental budget, Leila?
No, not for revenue. Because we're estimating revenue based on the current rate because we don't know what and when council will adopt a new water rate. So we're making a conservative revenue estimate. If we were talking about expenditures, we'd need to come back and do a supplemental. But one important thing for the budget committee to consider is that we will be in a much stronger financial position with respect to the water utility next year. And almost immediately, as soon as we put these new rates into effect, that's going to significantly impact our revenue. So if you'll recall from last year's budget, we only had about $53,000 in reserves or unappropriated ending fund balance. We're at 65 this year. If you account for the fact that Dan's receipts are now at 1.1 million, we're at actually 165. So with the new rate increase, we're going to have enough resources for us to have a thoughtful policy discussion on a reserve and be able to establish a pretty solid reserve next year.
Right.
And we will be able to talk more in depth about capital projects, maintenance projects, because of that. And Dan's going to go over tomorrow some of the findings from the rate study that show that, like, had we adjusted for inflation, where we would have been, and the revenue effectively that we've lost over the last 10 years. So I just can't emphasize enough that Dan's solid good work on managing the water utility has kept the water utility not only functional, but in pretty darn good shape. But we are, I think we are now, and we will certainly be in a much more solid financial position once the council adopts a new water rate.
And just
But we didn't feel that we had enough information to make any really informed judgments about what that revenue looks like. So again, just being ultra conservative, we're sticking with what we know. And we know that if council adopts a new water rate, we're going to be just really solid.
And just for clarification, the meeting you're referring to tomorrow is not a budget committee meeting. It is a council workshop,
Right.
in which case they'll be reviewing all this material. So the role of the budget committee in this is simply to take a look and know these probably aren't going to be the actual numbers, but we're not involved in the decision to raise those rates. We're not involved in any communication planning about how that would work, correct?
That's correct. Thanks for that clarification. And yeah, we're meeting at 2 p.m. via Zoom to discuss that, as well as some financing options for City Hall.
So for next fiscal year's budget, if the water rates go into effect, we'd be looking to hopefully use some of that increase in the unexpended revenues to fund a reserve. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my hope, is that that the budget committee will recommend and council will adopt a formal reserve policy for the water fund. But we'll have an informal reserve this year.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I think is there any other questions on the resource side of it? All right, I think we're ready to start jumping into the fun part, the expenditures. So with the expenditures of the water budget, I'll kind of go through them. So salary and rate wages, those are for the positions we have, which is right now we have 3 utility workers, but this anticipates Jason will be becoming a senior utility worker in this coming budget year. So he is waiting on the state to be able to take his exam, and I got full faith and he'll pass that, no problem. We have our 2 other full-time utility workers, which is Josh and then Jason, or not Jason, but Jeremy. I've got too many J's in my department. They're all J's. So, and then I have Lori, who is part-time water billing clerk and part-time water administration. So a small part of her fund does come out of the road fund as well. And then we also, I'm going to keep throwing this caveat out there. We still have a part-time position, a half FTE that is still open. So anybody that's kind of semi-retired, I'm looking 3 days a week has benefits. So on that, we have the on-call time. This is for water guys that are essentially have to stay at home or have to stay within the area that respond to water emergencies. So they are paid at $3 an hour, half of what currently the police department is at. We have overtime. So this is where if we do get called out for water emergency, this fund, the overtime fund, is there to cover that. And then payroll, benefits, and expenditures, that's the benefit package. So moving down the list, anybody have any questions on the personnel services? Nope. All right. Moving down, materials and services. Building operations. Oh, did I hear somebody? All right. So building operations, this is going to cover essentially our operations of the building, electric, the internet, sewer, things like that. You'll see not really any big change. A couple thousand was added, but prices of everything is going up. So we've accounted for that. Contracted services, you'll see it's a pretty notable change in the contract services. This is because if you look down at the previous year at professional services went from $60,000 down to $15,000. And that was with a conversation with Layla, we looked at some of the expenditures and we said, okay, some of these actually should be falling under professional services, not under contract. So we maneuvered some of the funds over there, and we got to be able to cut some of that out. So you'll notice even the line items of both the professional service and the contract services does not equal what we spent last year. And that's really starting to focus in some of these line items that are really not based on contingency of problems. So insurance had an increase. You will note the budgetary, my number versus what City Hall puts in there. So, and this goes to the fact that, I put my number and I look at statistics, kind of how we've been looking at things, but it takes Layla and it takes Nina to really also go and meet with the insurance company, and they come back and give us a bunch more. And I'm going to throw it over to Layla because I see she unmuted herself, so she got some more info on it too.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, so we discuss, don't negotiate. I think I did a word slip in a meeting previously, so I want to make that real clear. We spend a few hours with CIS every year to discuss the insurance. And so staff, the administration side actually has that information. So when Dan submitted his budget proposal, Nina and I actually had the updated information to input in there after we discussed it with CIS. So I just wanted to share that with folks. And you'll see that difference includes the well system as well. No pun intended.
Okay. So moving down, advertising. This is just funds. Once again, I didn't change it. Oh, sorry, skipped the line. Office supplies. So office supplies, I remained the same. It covers the day-to-day stuff, paper, printer cartridges, things like that. Not really any change from last year. We did really good. Advertising, same thing, stayed the same. We use this for handouts, pamphlets, things like that. You'll see Public Works, we give out a lot of like little balsa planes, little Frisbees. Those aren't paid out of here, just so people know. We get those for free from other things, and then we distribute them and make us look good. So building maintenance, we're not planning a whole lot of big things with building maintenance this year. So one of the things we're looking at doing is doing some repair work to our garage doors. They've been on the building for 30 years. So we are going to spend just a little bit of money there. And that's what the 5,000 is there to help represent. Once again, professional services dropped. These are essentially things like for legal or tech contracts that we have. So uniform allowance. So I did raise that up a little bit just because the price of things are going up. So, and we only increased it $100. So not a big change there. Vehicle maintenance and supplies and repair. This covers vehicle repair work, tires, fuels, things like that. Once again, we did have a pretty good increase there. That's what I consider a pretty good size increase, because we're going to have to be replacing some tires on some of the heavier equipment this year. So like our tool cats getting retreads and things like that. Any questions so far as I'm burning through here? All right. So travel and training. This line item, I'm keeping it the same as last year. This pays for our water conferences, our schooling for several different things, including going out and getting training and certification hours, because we are required to have what they call CEUs. So this is part of the line items for that. Once again, no big changes in it. System maintenance. So this year we are decreasing the system maintenance fees. We did some other stuff. This I break down, so I actually see more of a breakdown than this, but essentially 60,000 of it is really geared towards the water distribution system. And so this helps with proactive maintenance and helps cover the cost of leaks. So water service leaks, damage, not so bad into the road and stuff. A water main can take out a whole road section real quick. So, and every time I say that, I see the fear in Layla's eyes, because she got to see one of those. So, we're also designating part of it, 10,000 towards our hydrant maintenance and repair. So you'll start seeing a lot more yellow hydrants this year. So, the other thing is I do put 5,000 of the water system funds into our emergency water supply. This helps pay for our water that we keep at the treatment plant that is like bottled water. We typically have 2 full pallets on hand, and then we also use it for parts and things like that for the water purification and the water filtration system trailer. 40,000 I do have marked in there. That is essentially for decommissioning the reservoir. Essentially it's the concrete reservoir. So it is more of a risk than it is a benefit. It's only 250,000 gallons of water, which seems like a lot, but in hindsight of our storage, it is not. This is also a project that was called out in our resiliency study and in our water master plan. So next line down is chemicals. These are chemicals we use for telemetry testing of water, keep at the water plant in case we have to chlorinate water or such. Billing administration. So I reduced this because this has been a new line item to Public Works now that we have water billing that's essentially in our office. So this is what we use to pay some of our fees out for having the bills printed. The fees, as Scott had said, when people pay by credit card, there's fees involved with that. And so we have to budget to pay for those type of fees. And I imagine over the next several years, this one hopefully will tighten up some more. The other thing that's in there is when we go to the full meter system, there is a fee to us, to the company that's the manufacturer, that creates that bridge for us to be able to see each one of the meters. So there's a fee in that. So that's part of that as well. Fire patrol. This is essentially what we have to pay to ODF to patrol the woods. So they make sure our water up where our dams are is not going to burn down. And then water testing. This varies a little bit year from year, but essentially this covers all of our tests for the drinking water program through Oregon Health Authority and the EPA. Once again, not really any big changes. You'll see that amongst a lot of the budget items. So that covers pretty much materials and services. Does anybody have any questions with that?
So I have a quick question about the water filtration system. So are we upgrading that, or it's really not upgrading? Are we bringing it up to usability in terms of the filtration of water, or are we going to continue to rely 100% on the wells?
So we're going to rely 100% on the wells. The water plant is still a functional water plant. It just has to have water pumped essentially into it or dropped into it. But with that being said, the water plant has tanks underneath it, so it has the capability of producing some clean water.
Okay, so the filtration system works then. So as a backup, it does work.
It is, yeah. It's what they consider a storage mode. So we have to do a few things to get it up and running. The normal person just can't walk in and hit a couple buttons and turn it on. The water plant is a very, very complicated piece of equipment, but it is able to be used as a water source. It just has no ability to bring water really into it. But as a lot of you know, I'm a person with a backup plan for a backup plan, and that's what the emergency well will someday be for. To allow us to exercise it more often, and then also to be able to use that as water. But if something happened tomorrow, I'm going to be throwing pumps in a creek, throw the rule book out the door, and we're going to start making water if we have to. So a backup plan for a backup.
So in terms of your kind of capital improvement plan, do you see the emergency well in the future, or is that?
I wouldn't want to sit here and put a date on it yet, Linda. It's something I've been working on essentially as I can work on it for grants. And unfortunately, Layla's schedule has been packed full, which means everybody else is also schedules packed full. So there's a lot of iron in the fire. So,
sure.
But it's something I definitely want to get back to, and so we will work that way.
I just don't want to lose sight on that. I think that's a pretty important system, and I totally understand why you're not doing it now, given everything else that's on everybody's plate. But I don't want to lose sight of it, and it sounds like you're keeping it alive.
Oh yes, I definitely want to see that get put in there. So
okay, thank you.
And in terms of process, just to check my assumptions, that is part of a longer term capital plan for the water fund would be a more formal presentation of some kind and then agreement with council on how those investments would play out, so that Linda's concern that she's raising would be discussed then, where there's some decision-making power about what of the 5 projects we need to do, which goes first, and how do we, then that's council's decision and ultimately.
Right.
Yeah, and we have a lot of things that we want to put money towards.
Yeah, I understand that. I just don't want us to get bogged down in those discussions now. And there's a capital plan to discuss later. So we can probably keep moving through the present day stuff and then get to the long range planning at the end.
Yes. All right. Any other questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to continue on. Capital outlay items. We only have $3,500 in there. Essentially, that is a catch kind of fund. Like in this case, when Scott's mentioned that we bought that large scale printer. So essentially it prints blueprints, maps, and such. That's why we got it for the water side of it. It's because we can print out water maps. But it also means a lot of our historical data can also be scanned. So that's what that fund's there. I have essentially nothing that's planned out. It's just there if we do need something that comes up. So I'm going to drop down to the Public Works, the transfer outs. So the Public Works Equipment Reserve Fund, this fund, typically your number you would see there would be going up much, much faster than what we are. And the reason it's not is because we've been buying nice used equipment and maintaining our equipment. So once again, I don't like going out and buying a brand new truck, because as soon as we drive it off the lot, we lost money. So in our current way, we're almost making money off the vehicles that we purchased and turn around and have to get rid of. So that's what's there. The $17,000 goes into the Equipment Reserve Fund, and we'll touch on that a little bit here and a little bit later. The next item on there is the indirect overhead payment to the general fund. And once again, this transfer out pays for everything that essentially everybody else outside of the water department is taking care of. Layla with her stuff, Nina with all the accounting and stuff, Nancy answering calls and phone calls, the equipment they use. So that's what the indirect funds are for. So that is the very end of the water transfer fund. Now we go to page 2, Anybody have any questions on any of it so far? I always like to say that. So we jump over to page 2, which is building operations. This is actually mislabeled. It is Department 410. So this is our, should be our well fund. I gotta skip pages here a second. Give me a second. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, that's the well fund. Let me make sure of that. Okay, so once again in here, not a lot of big changes. Matter of fact, a lot of things kind of going down, you'll note. So building operations, we dropped down a little bit just because I audit the power and stuff and what we use. Contracted services, we went up just $100 there. Once again, nothing extraordinary. And then insurance, we did have an increase on, no, I'm sorry, the insurance, yeah, the insurance stayed the same out there at the well site. The building maintenance, I don't have really much scheduled for that, but it's just in case like electric heater breaks, things like that. So we keep a little bit of a reserve fund in there. Travel and training, because this, I should step back. These items in this here are the items that are split for cost with Wheeler through the intergovernment agreement. What that split usually looks like is roughly almost 80-20. So whatever I spend out, for every dollar I spend out, Wheeler is paying 20 cents of that dollar. So professional services, we've been essentially in a water rights hold and what they call an administrative hold, us along with many other water systems in Oregon. And so there's $15,000 set aside for that in case it actually moves forward. I don't see that happening. The state right now is still working on another water basin. So, but it's there just in case the state comes up and says, hey, we're ready to move forward with your water right. So we are in a permit fee or permit state right now with that. Clothing, once again, stayed the same. Vehicle maintenance and repair stayed the same. And once again, that helps pay for tires and fuel and things like that. Travel and training, same as it is in the water for classes and stuff, we split them up. System maintenance and supplies. So this one, you'll see that it just over doubled. And the reason being is the CO2 stripper has been up and running for several years now. We're going to be doing some maintenance on it. And I do have an expectation that we're going to have to do some replacement of some parts internally. But I don't know yet essentially how vast of what we're going to have to spend. So until we get in there, we won't know. But I'm planning for essentially the worst. And we might not have to spend anything, but I want that funds there if there is. Chemicals and supply and telemetry. Once again, this is for chemicals that we use for treating the water out there. So for chlorine and for testing purposes, we have to use little packets and stuff to test water. So that's where all that comes out of. And then you'll also see on here the lease fee for $1,288. That is a fee that we have to pay to the Port of Tillamook Bay because we cross their railroads. So they have essentially like a franchise fee for an easement fee there. Testing for the well site, that I didn't change. Once again, we spend only what we need to, and it covers our annual tests along with also some monthly tests and some tests that are every 5 years, 10 years. So that fund stays the same. And then contingency, which is down at the bottom. And so we are at the 68,000 on the contingency fund for the water system fund. Any questions?
Hey, Dan, yesterday we were shown the outstanding debt owed by the city, and one of the debts was for the water revenue bond, which we were told is to help with the transmission system. Where does that
That
where does
the,
that
the bond the bond amount you see was not for the transmission system. It was for the water treatment facility. The federal government flipped the whole bill for the well site and transmission lines. They refused to pay for the water filtration plant, and there's a lot of history there, so I'm not going to dive too deep. But it was put to a public vote, and the public decided they wanted to put themselves in debt. So
what fund does that get paid out of?
the loan payment, correct me, Layla, where it's coming out of. All right, I know it's in here. I was just looking at it.
It comes out of fund. It comes out of the water utility fund. It's
There it is.
That's
Service.
and I
Thank you.
can't think about what it's for from yesterday. That's right. It's for the filtration system. So it's right here.
Thank you. I was looking for loan.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on that side?
No, but good
Right.
job, Dan.
No, thank you. All right, Vanna, hit the next button. All right, so we're getting into the Public Works Reserve Fund. So this fund essentially is where money goes into so we can purchase equipment like our trucks, heavy equipment, things like that. So this year we brought in essentially $17,000 from the water fund, $8,700 from the road fund, and then we earned $200 in interest. So, and we have a carryover balance of roughly $123,686. So purchase this year, I lowered the amount from $36,000 down to $20,000. We keep $20,000 there for essentially nothing that is essentially planned. So if we don't need it, it'll carry over. We won't spend it. But every once in a while, some good equipment comes up on the Oregon State surplus, and with the surplus, we have to jump on it or we miss out on it. So we keep it there in case there's a nice piece of equipment we'll come by, or if council says, "Hey, we want to see you do a new thing, and it's going to require a piece of equipment," that's where money would be coming from. Any questions on the reserve, on the equipment reserve? All right. So water SDCs. So this is the money everybody is always seeing, and kind of waving the flag that we have that money there, which is really good compared to a lot of other water systems. So, but SDCs, our resources from this are essentially every time somebody hooks onto water, they pay a fee. We did not see the anticipated constructions of this past year. So we had originally planned for, I think it was 30 new connections, and I want to say we're like at 16 or so. So I decided to go a lot more conservative on this. And so I am planning only for essentially 10 new water services. If we get more, hey, great. But it just rolls over. But I'm only planning for 10, so I'd rather be super conservative on it and hope we get that. So the water account has a large amount of money, so that means we made way more interest on it than all of our previous accounts. So we have about $6,000 in there. There's no water transfer out of essentially the water utility fund. And essentially, this is the last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Layla, but this is the last year that Puffin LID will be in the books. Okay. So as far as expenditures go, I have $22,000 in expenditures. We have $2,000, which is for any type of advertising, like if we have to advertise in the paper or such. And then we have $5,000 set for professional services. Part of that funding essentially is also we're going to be doing a water SDC renewal, or we're going to be doing an update to the SDC. So that is scheduled to hopefully start soon, and then we'll be looking at essentially finishing it up after July. We also have $200,000 set in water projects, and this essentially is for projects that are listed in our current CIP. And so this will be water, some street project money that's going into street projects, but also some money that's going into water projects that are just standalone water projects. They won't be linked to a full street recover or rebuild. And then transfers, you'll see that there is no indirect transfer to the general fund this year. So we're not anticipating any large projects. It will take up a lot of time. The contingency funds there for 20,000, and then of course the unappropriated ending fund is going to be near almost $2.7 million for our to be moved forward for future projects and such. Any questions on the water SDC funds, water construction fund?
Can you tell me, Dan, the last time the system development charge for the water system was updated? Or Layla or anybody?
I need to get one of those things where it's crickets in the background.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. I have to say, though, that one is definitely well maintained as far as keeping it updated compared to what the stormwater and the parks one was. So I do want to say it was updated about 6 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
So, and from the history, and like I said, don't quote me on the date. It's pretty close, but it looked like it was being raised every so often based upon a actual index instead of just here's a number and threw it out there. So, which by the way, everything from now on, my boss is definitely telling me we are doing correctly, and we will be doing annual updates based upon actual statistical numbers for inflation and such. So,
Perfect.
and I'm all for it. I want to make.
Well, it sounds like you have a tough boss. Yeah.
I have a boss that has taught me a lot. So,
I believe it.
all right. So, no other questions in the water SDC fund? I think we can hit the next one. Stormwater SDC. So, stormwater SDC, the city council has, give the inclination we're moving forward because water SD or the stormwater SDC, we couldn't find how they really figured out their SDC way back when. It did create a longer process than we were hoping, but it now puts it all on the correct path. And so we have it, essentially we put it out there. We had to send notices to every water person saying, hey, this is the methodology we are using for the SDC, which was done by a firm. And so we did count that into these funds. So unlike the water, where we don't know, the council hasn't approved a water price raise or not. The SDC one does have that where we are. So it essentially, we're figuring for 10 connections. So we're looking at $16,000. That's a pretty good chunk compared to the previous years. We are transferring in. I want to highlight this because to me it's still wrong. But we are having to transfer funds in from the general fund. So stormwater and water and roads are should essentially be their own utilities that self-support themselves. So, but once again, to keep some of the projects kind of moving forward, we've got to pull $25,000 in from the general fund. So expenditures wise, we have $20,000 for contracted services and $5,000 for material and services. So the 20 is essentially to help with some of the CIP projects because we've got a couple of them that we're looking at trying to get essentially to roughly what they call a 10% design point. So
may I ask you a question? This is Chip. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the SDC charges are for new installations, right?
Yep.
So the ongoing maintenance, in the absence of some other funding mechanism, will continue to have to be paid for by the general fund.
That is unfortunately correct. So, and because we've done so much construction in Manzanita over the many years, we haven't really brought in any SDC funds for stormwater. That's why we lack stormwater in a lot of places, and why projects have kind of start and stopped from a certain point, because we're pushing out that, but it's a slow process when you don't have much to work with. So $16,000 doesn't buy very much pipe in the ground, but for new people coming in, they're paying what would be their share. They're not paying for what a whole block is just because they're the last two on the list. So, and yes, there needs to be essentially a maintenance fee for the ongoing maintenance of our storm.
And I know this is not exactly a budget item, but you educated me on this subject. The stormwater system is not a complete interconnected system. Some of the storm drains we see go into a dry well. They aren't connected to a system.
Yes. Yeah. So we get a lot of phone calls. You look at like 3rd Street above Manzanita Avenue, 4th Street above Manzanita Avenue, north. People drive by, see it overflowing, and then contact us. And it's because they're just little dry wells, and they don't work, unfortunately. You have to get the water to channelize into something. And so it's because our ground gets saturated. I think our rainfall average right now is about 100. I think it's around 119 inches. So we get a lot of water. All right. Anything else on the water SDC storm drain construction? All right. On for the next one. So park facilities. The Park Facilities Fund, once again, this is one that gets essentially its SDCs. It's one that it's like stormwater. We haven't been able to find any of the methodology how they came up with the fee. That's a whole $60. So new park equipment, park trails, things like that, things that there's not a lot there. I can tell you this is on our list to do, but unfortunately it's down the list quite a ways. But it is on me and Layla's radar to eventually someday get to where we can update this one. So, and it's only based upon 10 connections, which makes us a total of $600. No questions, concerns? All right. So now to the road fund. Jump through my pages here. So the road fund, there have been some more changes in that. We'll start off with essentially the resource side of it. So we get money from franchise agreements. These franchising agreements, including like the ones for wastewater, Tillamook PUD, a very, very old one with the phone company, Charter Cable. So they collect funds, and they're paying for their ability to be in our public right-of-ways. And it helps pay for our public right-of-ways to keep the actual infrastructure together. So that accounts for about $70,000. I have street permit fees. You'll notice the street fees are doubling from essentially last year's fee. It's because one of the things Layla is moving forward with is the I can't even speak. The essentially the fee defer. I'm gonna say it wrong so many times. Essentially, we're updating our fees, and so when we do that, we are getting them in line where they should be for the amount of time spent on them. So there's going to be an increase. I am being very conservative. I think we'll get way more than $2,000 worth, but I'd rather have lots of rollover funds to be used than not have enough money to go into the next year. So the motor vehicle tax that comes into the city, and so that accounts for $40,000. That includes the gas tax, things like that. We don't have any grants right now put in the budget. That's one of the things that if we do happen to find a grant, we will come back to budget committee and say, hey, we received a grant. We need to alter the budget for all kinds of good reasons, not bad reasons. So we're leaving that essentially nothing or zero for right now. So interest rates, once again, it's what we get for having money in the bank. The road fund takes funds from the general fund. So there's $100,000 that comes in from the general fund that helps pay for road maintenance and everything to do with essentially the upkeep. Any questions on revenue? All right, expenditure time. So salaries, wages, and salaries. This helps as part of the payments to the utility workers, along with the benefit package. I'm going to drop down to material services. So contracted services, no real change there. That's for minor engineering that we might need for small pieces, not really tied to big projects. Professional services, once again, no change there. Insurance, the lower the insurance rate was, or insurance was a little bit less, so we made a small adjustment there. Building maintenance and supplies, you'll notice there's $5,000 in that budget line, and that also once again helps pay for the doors to the building that we're going to replace. So a lot of things, like when it comes to the buildings and stuff, I split the costs up between the water fund and the road fund, since they're both using the same building. And it's not fair from one or the other fund to just fund it themselves. So the vehicle maintenance supplies, once again, this is paying for our fuel, our minor maintenance, the oil changes. And so that line item is, where I lost my small print here. Yeah, so it's the same as last year. Travel and training. I've upped this a little bit because one of the things I'm going to be doing is sending out my utility workers out to receive more training actually for road stuff along with water. But roads are important to have knowledge on new technologies, on preventative maintenance. Street signs, this stays the same. Miscellaneous, this is just what it is, miscellaneous fees. And then uniform allowance stayed the same for the road department. So we did see a little bit of a increase in funds this year, roughly about $9,000 on expenditures for roads. Any questions on material and services?
Dan, you're not looking at expanding street lighting at all at this point, correct?
Negatory, not at all.
Okay.
Okay. So capital outlay, we have $25,000 set aside for, once again, for street projects that we are looking at in the future that are essentially engineering to get some of the capital improvement projects to 10% mark.
Is the 614,000 Dorcas for this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Chip. I was looking at this year and I'm going, I didn't budget 614. No, that's for next year. I am anticipating some rollover, but I won't know until the project's complete. So I'm trying to get as much as I can done out of this project as we could. So
status update on Dorcas. It looks like it's going well.
It's going pretty good. We've ran into some conflicts with other utilities that we've had to work around. So, but all in all, the project is going well. I don't know if anybody got to see, but they did put the water main in, which is now HDPE, a resilient material. They had it lifted up and over Lanita Avenue. So if anybody asks, well, how much can that stuff bend? Well, if you got to see it, you can see it can move and bend a lot. So.
Was that the pile of black pipe that was over on 3rd or 4th?
Yep. Yeah, they fused it all together and it became one long noodle. And then they put it on rollers, rolled it down across Manzanita Avenue. And then I don't know if you got to see it on Skin Chip. They raised it up and over that you could actually drive a semi underneath it. And then back down and then went for a few feet on the ground and then got sucked into the ground. So it's really cool technology. Of course, when it works. So,
yeah.
I have a question here. Looks like your road fund doesn't seem like you have any project for putting any new sidewalk or bike lane in the upcoming year. Is that right?
That is correct.
So we don't have any plan for that?
No, there are no plans for any sidewalks or anything.
And no money.
Yeah, and no money. But once again, the funds that are set in there, that $25,000 is literally to start design work. And And I don't know what that's looking like, but that's to help kind of start figuring out what we want the next CIP projects, which are listed on our list, which essentially is going to be the continuation or finish up of Dorcas, and then we're going to be working towards Classic is what's listed in our CIP at the moment for street projects. So,
But
all
you
right.
hit on a pretty key point, Kit, that Chip sort of enunciated, which is there isn't sufficient funding for infrastructure for transportation, and the
No.
majority of funding for transportation has been transfers from the general fund, which is unsustainable. So part of the city's revenue diversification strategy, the council will have to consider, and it's really up to them to determine whether or not we should find more sustainable funding sources for transportation, which we currently don't have. One thing we are doing, though, which is noted in the budget book, is that we will be adopting, hopefully, a regional transportation systems plan, and that can become the starting point for the city to look at system development charges. System expansion could include things like sidewalks and trails because they expand capacity. Capacity expansion is sort of a necessary component of system development charge usage. It's unlike maintenance. So we don't have either at this point. We don't have money for system expansion and we don't have money for system maintenance. So the road fund is primarily dependent on, as Dan noted, the franchise and motor vehicle tax basically covers staff salaries. And then we have to transfer money from the general fund in order to, we effectively subsidize the road fund because we have not developed any sustainable funding sources to maintain or expand our system. So the SDC will take time. We have to adopt a plan. Then we have to go through a pretty significant study and develop a methodology. So that would take a couple years, most likely, just so people's expectations can be real. But the revenue diversification study that we just completed did provide council with some short-term options that they can consider. And I think those discussions will be happening over the next year. But this is just one example of how if we want to diversify revenue, then we need to find alternate funding sources to maintain infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome job, Dan.
Thank you.
As you did.
I think that was my what do we got? I think that's
it for you. Unless anybody has questions.
Yeah, anybody got any questions? All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. You're a rock star. Learn as much from Dan as he claims to learn from me, if not more.
Yeah, I will say I have learned a ton from Layla. So, by the way, I've also had lots of people ask if they can poach her. So, the answer to them has always been no.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, we've got 10 more funds to go through. Just kidding. Just 2. Should I jump to a chair? Am I good?
Oh, let's charge ahead.
All right. We're going to keep moving forward. So, Housing Rehabilitation Loan Fund. So, this loan fund was established in 1998. It's something I'd hoped to get a little bit further down the track this fiscal year, but just didn't. Apparently, these resources were allocated through the Community Development Block Grant Program to provide low interest loans to folks meeting certain income criteria to repair their homes. We had a contract with an agency that administered these grants. It has been a very long time since any of those. We've received some payments. I think the last one we received randomly was in 2021, 22. But this fund has really remained pretty much static. I think the city of Manzanita was the only city that kept those funds. Our neighboring cities actually returned them back to the county to be used. So I've done some outreach to the county. I haven't, and to the organization, I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now, that used to administer these funds and have had really no luck. So I'm keeping it in here for this budget year, but I do expect to take action next year and look at what our options are for either returning the money or transferring it back to the general fund. And if we need to return it, we can. But I didn't feel prepared to do that this year. So I'm just proposing to keep the sort of revenue and expenditures the same. So it's just another one of those vestiges from the past. And we want to make sure that these funds get back into the hands that they're supposed to be. So that's that. You have any questions about that? And then the Timber Management Fund. So we own a pretty big chunk of land. I believe there's 4 parcels that we own. And the last time it was harvested was in 2021. And those funds were transferred into the City Hall Expansion Fund and have paid for the majority of the due diligence and work that's been completed to date. So right now we're sort of in a holding pattern. We harvest these, as I understand, every 10 to 20 years. So I don't expect to see much change in this. So we've just, the carryover balance reflects what was remaining, interest earned. And then we maintain contract services as a line item in case we need to do road maintenance or anything related to access to that site. So Dan actually helps manage that piece, but works with this forester that we have on contract, can help if we need to. So most of that funding is just in the unappropriated ending fund balance. We don't expect any activity on that this fiscal year. And that is the conclusion of the 2023-24 budget. Just for folks that are paying attention, so we have our public hearing is scheduled at 6 p.m. on May 17th. So that's a week from tomorrow, where we will take public comment and where the budget committee will approve the tax rate, state revenue sharing, and then recommend, hopefully, adoption of the budget to City Council. And then the City Council public hearing will be held on June 14th. All these meetings will be held via Zoom, been noticed. And that is the point at which the City Council will adopt the budget. And that will be a public hearing as well. So public comment will be received at that meeting as well, I believe. And that's where they approve the appropriations and all the resolutions. So all that will be accounted for in that meeting.
We have room for a couple comments.
Yes, I was gonna say that. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about in connection with the budget?
I would like to say that thank you to Layla and staff. I know Kit, our newest member, has referenced this several times already, but when you've got a lot of staff who are learning and growing, which is great. You always want to be learning and growing in jobs. And so seeing how staff prepared and then presented this year, again, I think it's another step up for everybody, which is always really good to see. Quality of the presentation's been good. I always learn something in public works, even at some point I go, I don't want to learn any more about the bubbler, but still, the bubbler is important. So the stripper, the bubbler is something you do on a dock in the Great North to keep the dock from freezing in the lake. I had the wrong term, so I'm not going to learned it as well as I thought. But I just, and this goes back to our meeting yesterday in the opening statement, you can look at this in the year that we're in 2 ways. Well, multiple ways, but at least 2 ways. One is you can, say, wow, this is another, in a really good way, another turning point kind of a year. Mm-hmm. Problems have been discussed, gaps have been discussed, but I always feel better in any situation when you can start to really lay out for everybody to understand where we're in good shape and where we have challenges. And I thought this year's opening, Layla, was a very good reflection of where we're at. We're in very good shape in many ways. We've got some challenges and others. Council, not the budget committee, but council have got some big decisions coming up that people have a lot of interest in. The city hall, the long range planning for the community, the fact it's very clear where we're not making plans in a couple of areas. And I think, and this is wise, I think you've used the budget and the budgeting process to push us to the point where it's very clear what work needs to happen now. And there's going to be, I'm sure, to use the euphemism, a lot of robust discussion.
Yeah.
And it's not really a laughing matter because there's a lot of stuff that's coming up. There's a lot of impact, and there are a lot of people who are completely comfortable with this conversation and these concepts. And then there are a lot of people who are less familiar with it. So it's been a big education job. I think that all of council have been participating in this last year to help have a well-informed community discussion about this, because we have choices here. So I would just like to commend everybody on council as well who's been a part of this and getting us to this point, because this you know, I look at the world in my own way, but this feels much better in terms of having some tangible things to discuss and knowing that there are solutions to all of these things. It's just a matter of how we make the choices, which is a big difference from being kind of generally anxious about stuff and not sure what we should do. So I think this is a really good setup, not just for this year, but also for the next couple of years. And certainly there's a lot of capital planning that needs to be done, but I feel like we've certainly made huge progress in the last couple of years, and I'm confident we'll continue to do that. So I just wanted to thank everybody on here, especially council and the staff, because it's been a lot of hard work. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I can add to that. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hate to follow Catherine because she's the touchy-feely one, and I'm not. When I look at the capital improvement plan, there are 7 water projects on there, and this is for the council to decide, but I assume, Leila, that these will be figured into the water rates, meaning you not only have to pay for current operation and maintenance, but somehow in there, the rates have to raise enough money to pay for these 7 major projects.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you want to learn more, you can come to the council meeting tomorrow or watch last month's meeting where Dan and Tim Tice were there. But those capital projects are integrated into the analysis for which the rates that were being proposed are based on.
Thank you.
And I just want to add something as somebody's been on the budget committee, I think longer than anybody else. It's been at least 10, 12 years that with the council adopting the goal of leveling up Manzanita and budgeting forward, it shows that we're paying attention to dealing with the difficulties this town has in funding itself. And because we have this problem of concern among people about the impact of all the visitors staying overnight and impacting all the small town characteristics. But we need them. Without them, this town would not exist. So it's that balance for the people and the visitors that I'm glad that the council has been looking into the future, and particularly like the diversified revenue stream. I was very pleased when we held discussions on that, and I threw out a number of my own ideas too. So my compliments to the council for looking forward. So I appreciate it as just another long-term citizen. So does anybody else have anything touchy-feely they want to say? Okay, well, as
I just want to say that this is, in my opinion, this is a very well put together project, and then we have a knowledgeable city manager, and then I feel she's doing a great job.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody else. So, as Leila said, our next meeting will be a week from tomorrow. It will be at 6 o'clock. And that's where we will go through the certain evolution of the revenue sharing and setting the property rate, and then voting to approve our proposed budget that will be sent on to the city council, and they will have to formally adopt it in mid-June. So with that, without any objection, I'd like to declare this meeting adjourned, and thank you, everybody. See you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.